Thank you so much, and we're so glad you're here. This is, as you know, a modern retail forum looking at retail strategies in 2023. Perhaps few years in recent history on a purely economic level have been as interesting as the last half of 2022 and the top of 2023. We know that there are many prognostications out there about what will happen, what was supposed to have happened already, and yet there are also hard metrics showing us that something is underway. Inflation's on the rise, for example. And so in this session, I'm James O'Brien, president of Custom, which is the in-house agency here at Digiday Media, work on all of our sponsors' projects across Digiday, Modern Retail, Glossy, Work-Life. We're here with our sponsor, Snowflake, and that's the topic at hand, the retailer and the brand. How are they tackling elements of economic uncertainty and economic hardship like inflation by leveraging economic data? Very excited to be on the screen with Andy Appel, who's the Senior Sales Engineering Manager for Retail and CPG at Snowflake. Snowflake is enabling its partners, collaborating with them to make the very mission-critical and data-driven decisions, working within, say, a retail data cloud, for example, that provides solutions that keep customers competitive despite the economic uncertainties that we've just mentioned. I'm also here with Erik Mitchell, who's the CEO of Seek, and the gift that Seek brings to this conversation, they're a platform that scales the kind of expertise, the data-driven expertise on these kinds of subjects, for in particular retail and consumer goods, speeding up the insights they need to make those decisions and solve the kind of problems we're going to talk about today. So Andy and Erik, welcome to the show, and I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Erik, let's start on your side of the table. Someone who's spending a lot of time looking at what the experts are able to say, and by some aggregate, what all of this expertise might mean. If we're talking about big economic trends, including inflation, including rumors of recession or predictions of recession, and their impact on consumer behavior, what are some of those prevailing trends, my opinions on it aside, that we need to be thinking about in, say, the end of Q1 2023? Here we are in March. Where do we stand?
Yeah, I think James, there's two big buckets of trends that we see both within our clients and then with other companies within the industry of retail and consumer goods that organizations are dealing with. The first one being supply chain constraints. And I think supply chain constraints obviously have been around for a number of years now, probably 2 or 3 years due to the COVID pandemic that we had across the globe. And that really caused a strain on the ability for organizations to produce goods. And what that does is it actually creates one type of inflation, which is called demand pull inflation. What that means is that there's not enough product being produced for the demand that's coming through in the market. We saw that in a bunch of different areas of retail and consumer goods. Some instances might be, or some departments might be things like, electronics, right? Where creating those products, producing those products was extremely difficult under the circumstances of COVID. What that leads to is not only, inflation from a cost and demand perspective, but what it also does is it leads to what's called cost push inflation as well, which is where those products not only are being produced in lower quantities, but the costs are going up as well. So what that's doing to the consumer on the back end of this equation is making everything on the shelf a lot more expensive to buy, and taking their budgets and making them go a little bit shorter, a little bit less far, let's say, within the grocery store, within any channel of retail. And so what we're seeing is those supply chain constraints are really causing pain on the consumer and causing inflation to hit their wallets a little harder than we've seen in the last couple of years.
Fascinating. The supply chain issue is a central factor here, and now we're caught between that demand pull and that cost push inflation. And Andy, as we think about these things, Snowflake's working with clients that are in turn working with these very consumers whose budgets are being changed, or they are changing their budgets in response to these pressures. And what do you see? What do you see your partners dealing with in terms of consumer behavior, the marketplace pressures due to the trends Erik is flagging for us. When it comes to manifesting in the day-to-day challenges that you're helping them with, dial us in there. What is happening?
Well, first, I'll start off with, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about, but we also have to be realists in that the environment right now, there's a lot of uncertainty amongst the consumers. And you can see that in recent checks for consumer sentiment is still 14% below pre-pandemic levels. Inflation in some key areas like food and bev, I think was at 10.4%, last reading, shelter at 8%. And when that much of your dollar is being spent on necessities, there have to be trade-offs. So in turn, what the customers that we're fortunate enough to work with are really asking us to do is to help them find a way to increase the value of that dollar for things. And there's three main asks that we've been seeing from customers. One is they're asking for solutions, not just ideas, but actually turnkey solutions that address specific problems like whether it's OTIF, on-shelf availability, the long list. And they want to work with people who have truly catalogs of it so that it's not a contract every time I want to solve one solution. I can almost select the solutions as needed for it. And then second, much like a patient who's able to go and get all of the specialists and their generalists and their CPA and their financial advisor in the same room together to holistically look at, I'll call a person an ecosystem at this point. They want us to help facilitate collaboration with people to look at the entire supply chain ecosystem from where are the materials to the transportation, to the manufacturing, to the technology part, point of sale, how is that streaming in to the very end of it, the machine learning models. Is that all happening fast enough? So we're being asked to help streamline that and make that more efficient. And I think the third part we're being asked to do, and not just alone, but with our partners, is bring some advice. I'm fortunate to work with like some magnificently run companies with some brilliant leadership, but all of them will share that they can't know everything. And at this point, bringing in some of that expertise to help with blind spots or open up new opportunities so that they're not reacting, they're able to be more proactive. The other piece of the advice I'm starting to hear more and more frequently is people who want advice on how can they accelerate the change in the company, which is something, it's a blend of technology, but there's really a lot more process and skill that needs to work through.
I mean, three main things right there, right? And you can hear, Erik, I'm sure, the impact of that demand pull in the first one, which is we need something that's simple, straightforward, just helps us keep those products on the shelves. That's the first ask that you mentioned there, Andy. And then build us a bench of experts, they say to you at Snowflake. Please get us together with the people that can actually drive this kind of change. And oh, by the way, we need to break it out into a real tactical plan. We can't just sit around a table and talk about it. So that's what you're up to on your side, Andy. That sounds like it takes a heap load of data to create that kind of insight, just identifying who the expert should be, identifying what the tactical plan should consist of, and then measuring and assessing and optimizing to keep those shelves full and maybe bring some of that cost push away from the consumer. That comes back to you, I think, Erik, the correlation between all these things, the macroeconomics, the consumer behavior, the retailer brand response, it's all in these examples that you just said, Andy. How, Erik, are these brands and retailers getting to that data, that macroeconomic data they need to stay competitive, to create those three outcomes at least, and catch up with changing consumer behavior?
Sure. Yeah, so I think, what's interesting about this is, as Andy mentioned, organizations today are now looking for solutions, to Andy's point. What that means is a combination of these different types of data sources brought together to solve one particular problem. So if we think about, leveraging data to solve the supply chain issues, on-shelf availability, leveraging macroeconomic data like, let's say trucking availability, or let's say, production quantities of certain commodities or certain types of products coming out of different countries, monitoring inflation in its macroeconomic macroeconomic way to understand how pricing is changing across the different parts of the country, across the different parts of the world. I think what's interesting is our customers aren't necessarily looking for just the raw data, but to Andy's point, they're looking for the raw data in a seamless and fast way through platforms like Snowflake that enable that. And then they're looking for partners that can bring that data together to create a solution that actually solves the problem of on-shelf availability. So how do I leverage, trucking lane data and weather data and other types of data to actually solve for a specific product being on the shelf in a specific store in part of the country? So what organizations are struggling with today is that they don't necessarily have massive analytics teams to build those things internally. So as Andy mentioned, what they're looking for is a combination of partners like Snowflake and Seek to actually create that solution for them by leveraging some of the best data sources in the market. And so, James, as you think about where you can get this type of data, the Snowflake Data Marketplace obviously is a fantastic place to start. There are organizations out there that have the best of the best types of data. So you think about within our portfolio, there's a data provider called Noma that provides all of this macroeconomic data on things like truck lanes or on things like inflation atlases or global macroeconomic data. And then you pair that with some of the most commonly used point of sale data providers, or let's say shopper or loyalty data providers. And you create some really robust solutions on top of all that data that help you get closer and closer and closer to answering the question of a particular item on a particular shelf in a particular store on a particular day. And so I think, as you think about bringing all that data together, starting with something like the Snowflake Data Marketplace, and Andy can speak to that more, is just a fantastic place to start to get data without needing to FTP that data into your environment, without needing to spend months bringing it into your environment, normalizing it with other types of data. It just creates a seamless and extremely fast way to ingest that data and create those solutions.
I think
please, you, Andy.
Thanks. Just to add on, to what Erik was saying for the marketplace, if people haven't been exposed to it yet, some of the differentiators, besides it just being a wonderful catalog with rich options, is it's single easy button click to have the data available in your system. It's instant updates because you're actually reading the live data. So some of the friction or those barriers of either the technical piece of how do I move the data, the FTP, the imports it, are gone. And also those time delays are gone. And both are incredibly important. I think, we could debate on another segment at some point, which is more important, but the end result is people have the data they need immediately at their fingertips at all times. And that's a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I think to add one more piece to that, one more piece of context, we've had customers that have taken their time to deployment, let's say, for a particular solution from 12 months to maybe 12 days. And in some cases gotten data, taking, let's say ingestion processes of data from 6 months to 6 clicks. And so, that's the type of speed and acceleration that we're talking about with these new platforms like Snowflake and Seek that can enable that time to come down. And as you can imagine, things like inflation, things like supply chain constraints, these are near real-time daily level problems that need to be solved today for tomorrow, instead of being solved today for 6 months from now. So that speed is critical for our customers leveraging this type of data.
I think the phrase at the speed of competition has been something that has been in my agency's lexicon quite a bit for the past couple of years. And you're definitely speaking to that concept here, Erik and Andy. Also, data is a strange place for, it's like visiting a strange place for, say, a retailer or a brand that is wading in. And it's a place where sometimes you don't speak the language well enough or all the languages you need to. I hear at the center of what both of you are saying, Andy and Erik, that the relationship is that of the brilliant concierge, the deeply experienced driver, the facile and quick-witted guide all at once, working in that strange place for that brand or retailer and making things familiar and navigable. And that's a prompt, I suppose, Andy, for us to think about dialing down to one example of that kind of relationship. A story that you could share with us of working with a client recently that's responding to these macroeconomics, the changes that they've made. What did the teams learn collectively? Snowflake, Seek, the client. What happened to the campaign or the campaigns because of the kind of guidance that you're talking about being brought to bear?
Sure. And I tell you, if you want to get members on my team excited, ask them to tell their favorite success story, and the room gets loud very quickly. But I think one that I'll bring up right now that I like is a global CPG company and a national retailer getting together with a focus on how do they reduce the cost to serve. This was collaboration during COVID, so all through Zoom, no onlines, and what they had been sharing data before, but through limited amounts of data and through whether there was FTP or some other means, it was slow. They decided to do a bi-directional share of inventory level data, store level data between the two, access the end results, which were, when I say immediate at this point, within weeks, people recognizing out of stock reduced from 20% for this brand to 4%, sorry, to 6%, so 14% reduction on that point, which is almost a 5% growth in revenue for that. In addition to that, forecasting much more accurate in the future, so future savings are anticipated down the road. What the companies were finding is that when they were operating better jointly at this point, not only the dollars that they were making saving on their end, but from the consumer experience, it was a much better experience because some of the brands the customer loved were on the shelf at the right store in the right place for it, which meant that people were walking by empty shelves, which was not that long ago, which was a bad experience. It's also particular for the brand, and I would argue it's more for the brand on this side than for the retailer. Brand loyalty is really hard to build, and once you have it, you want to do everything you can to hold on to it. And when something doesn't exist on a shelf and you need to provide necessities for your family, you go towards alternate brands, the peanut butters, the milks, the gel, the chips, the breads, things like the long list. And in this case, the brand is helping to build that brand or solidify that brand loyalty. And that the retailer's also happier, and I anticipate this expanding. It's a textbook case of what can be done, and the technology pieces, while Snowflake was a platform that it ran on, it was minimal. There was nothing custom built. It was more a discussion about where would we mutually benefit the most to help our customer. How are we going to do this in a secure, governed environment, and set up, once those discussions took place, set up in days.
Yeah, and I think James, what's interesting about that too is, Andy mentioned obviously both the retailer and the brand benefiting from this, and forecasting being one of those critical pieces that gets better as you engage in this type of data sharing and collaboration. What's interesting is a lot of organizations today forecast, let's say, using historical shipment data, for example, because the point of sale data is simply hard to get to. I think as we move towards this new world of collaboration, what you start to see is some of that store level point of sale data, which is kind of the true leading edge indicator of consumer demand, is helping inform everything all the way back to the original commodity purchases, let's say, of the individual products. So as we think about going back to the beginning, thinking about how producing the right amounts of commodities or materials can impact pricing all the way downstream, leveraging the data at the leading edge of consumer demand and collaborating between retailers and consumer goods companies can help better inform forecasts for commodity purchases, which can reduce prices for those initial buys. And that impact goes all the way to the consumer to help tame inflation on the consumer side as well. So as you think about these organizations collaborating, it's not simply to drive sales, it's also to help the pricing and ease inflation on the consumer side as well.
Right, and that's an important and central point that maybe we started with to some extent, but we should maybe refocus for just a moment and point out a note is that these are all mission critical business decisions, as you know, as you noted, Andy. You know, the brand loyalty is at the end of a spectrum of customer relationship for a reason. It takes the longest to get there, and fulfillment and supply are at the top end of a customer relationship story, because it's the first place where you can really blow it and it's the first point of contact. But attendant to all of those challenges, in this conversation, there's a real world outcome, which is kitchen table economics, right? What you have in the budget for the goods that you need for yourself, for your family, for your household and your life. And while we are absolutely focused on solving problems for the retailers and the consumer goods clients that we're talking about, we're also aware that we're generating, at the best, a net positive for people and how they can live their lives in the sway of these macroeconomic trends. I think that that's super important to remember, that we're doing good. This is about doing good and doing business.
Absolutely.
Let's think about the future then, just a little bit. And you made a point, like there's planning like 6 months down the road, planning for tomorrow. There are different frameworks for the future that we can probably offer advice on in this particular session. But I'm thinking about the fact that, well, we're halfway through the first half of the year. So for the kinds of partners we're talking about, they're switching well into the 2H mode of thinking, I would imagine. And given the changes in the way people shop and consume over the past couple of years, the holiday windows have dialed back to a certain extent and stayed there in terms of planning to reach people around big moments that we associate. Think about not just holiday, back to school, then all of the different shopping tentpoles, and of course the holidays that accrue at the end of the year. So one question, each of you take a crack at it, thinking about everything that we've just talked about, all the examples. What is one thing, you get one thing that every brand or retailer should put at the top of their list in Q2 to get ready for 2H and the tentpoles that come up in the marketplace across 2H?
Erik, do you mind if I kick this one off?
Sure.
So I should, for future planning, like to paraphrase an operational adage, is that a good plan executed extremely well today is worth a lot more than a perfect plan executed weeks into the future. And we know there's going to be uncertainty, and we also don't know specifically what those changes will be in the future, but we can most definitely plan, for that. And I think two tenets. So it's one answer with two tenets, a part A and a part B. The first tenet, I think is it summarizes saying like efficiency helps facilitate agility, and agility helps build resiliency. For that, the second tenet is stability building, confidence. And so for that part A, the efficiency, make sure, today that your pipelines, that not just the first party data, the second party, third party data, they're stable. They're working, they're automated at this point. But on top of that you have the flexibility to add more, because of things we can guarantee, there will be more valuable data in the future that you're going to want to use. So make sure that you're working in an environment to where it's frictionless just for you to add more. In that same vein of building efficiency, architecture can be a wonderful asset. It can also be a burden, depending upon what you're on. Work with people to retire some legacy architecture if it's not benefiting you, and if it's holding you back from being creative, exploring. And along the lines of stability, business continuity, disaster recovery, I liken it to driving at night without your seatbelt on and without your headlights on. You're hoping for the best, but you're increasing the risk of something happening on there. Business continuity doesn't mean that everything has to be backed up, multiple times and available, But for your mission critical options, think cross cloud. Things happen. When servers are down, seconds feel like minutes, minutes feel like hours, and it feels like days. For your mission critical items, get that business continuity plan like out and done. And fortunately, you don't have to do that alone, or better put, you shouldn't do it alone. Bring in experts who can help you get this done quickly, efficiently, while you can maintain your focus on the business and the consumers.
Yeah, I think Andy, to piggyback on that, I think and tether back to something we said at the very beginning, I think for me, if I had to pick one thing, it would be generating faster speed to insights. And I think what that means in my head is moving from this kind of culture of being data driven, where you're focused on just acquiring as much data as you can, to being an insight driven organization, which is creating as many solutions as you can, powered by the best data in the market. And I think as we think about, a couple years ago with organizations moving more into the data and analytics space, a lot of them set out to be a data-driven organization. The first step of that was to acquire the right data. I think what we're seeing now is the technology has caught up, and the technology has gotten to the point where you can enable these solutions that you run today to solve a problem for tomorrow, instead of solving the problem for 6 months from now. And with that, the needs of the analytics organization are changing. We need more flexible solutions. We need faster speed to deploy solutions and applications. We need more insights that may seem, let's say, less focused or more scattered, I should say. Macroeconomic trends can change very quickly. And so you need the flexibility to be able to use the right data in a platform that makes it seamless to get to that data. And you need the ability to deploy applications to get to those insights quickly. And so as we think about generating that speed, moving from a data-driven organization that just focuses on acquiring data to an insights-driven organization that's focused on acquiring the right data for the right solution to solve the right problem for tomorrow, I think is where we will see the leaders in the space separate themselves from the rest of the industry. And that's where leveraging the technologies that we supply, I think is where people can start to understand how they can generate that impact. Andy, back to your customer story, in weeks rather than months, or days rather than months. And so that's what I would say I would focus on if I was an organization, is becoming an insights-driven organization, which is using data in a flexible and fast manner to solve the problems of tomorrow.
Right on. I hear two big takeaways there, one from Andy, one from you, Erik. Audit for efficiency. Figure out where you stand as an efficient shop, and all those other things that can stem from it that you rightly noted, Andy, that do stem from it. Measure the velocity of your response capabilities. How quickly can you take an insight to action? That's what I hear your point being for the near future, Erik. And if I have that right, let me thank both of you for being here. This has been a brilliant conversation. I hope you'll come back and join us again on another forum, and let's see what happens on the other side of this macroeconomic moment that we're living through. I'm James O'Brien, President of Custom here at Digiday Agency. I've been here with Andy Appel, who's the Senior Sales Engineering Manager for Retail and CPG at Snowflake, our sponsor, and Erik Mitchell, CEO of Seek. We'll see you again soon. Right now, back to the editors and more of this Modern Retail